So we now have 2 points to start our analysis from. And the other one is that when they produce this much, people are going to stay on their demand curve and have to pay this much, right? So this will be the price of the product on the market. This will be where they set the quantity. And then their internal costs are going to lead them down here to, say, the cost of producing that quantity. This leads to 2 welfare triangles that we can already do, this one being the dead weight loss triangle. This is the dead weight loss of having our quantity restricted. And then there's a big area here from this big high price down to the cost that it's costing to produce it. And this has a few names, but I could call it monopoly profit. But profit might include something else, so we could also call it monopoly rent. Rent is a term when something is scarce and you control the scarcity. Just controlling that scarcity, you get some value. You get to derive the value of it. So monopoly rent. They control the scarcity of this product. So this is from the last lecture, but we're going to keep talking about this stuff. We're going to keep talking about this question of restricting quantity, whether that's illegal or legal, and how we deal with that. The monopolist takes the consumer surplus, and they give it to themselves. They produce less than the perfect competition quantity. So we have a whole bunch of places, especially in the energy sector, that we have regulated monopolies, right? So in a lot of utilities, and certainly in electricity and gas, we have monopolies. These are really important ones if we're going to look at conservation and a low-carbon future. And we require these companies to sell output to anybody who demands it at a certain price. And we have tiers of prices. We have the consumer price. And I showed you in California, there's different sectors of California that get different base allocations that they pay a low price. We have a wholesale price. Because we want to have some big industries, it's worth it to us to have that multiplier into our economies. We have lower prices for big companies. We're going to buy big chunks. We have reliability prices. We have some people who will get electricity no matter what. We have some people who are willing to give up electricity in the case of a brownout, rolling blackouts. So we require these companies to submit their costs, and we know what they're issuing bonds at. So we have government regulators that are looking into this spreadsheet, and they have a board that has people from industry and people from the consumer side, and they set this regulated price. Certainly, and I can talk about this at other times, this nuclear power plant question, what are the right components of this cost? So right now, there's a huge nuclear power plant in Southern California, in Orange County, right on the beach. San Clemente, San Onofre is what it's called. And they've just closed it because they tried to fix it and they couldn't figure out how to fix it. And they did a terrible job fixing it and it wasn't fixed, so they just closed it. And this is billions of dollars that we'll pay because we're consuming. Well, mostly the people who belong to Southern California Edison, which is LA, will pay. But they're going to go and fight tooth and nail over some spreadsheets of whose fault is it, who needs to pay which cost of it. Right? So we have this nuclear power plant that's going to take 30 or 40 years for them to sort of clean it up and move the waste out. It's got piles full of waste in there. Who's going to move that waste? Where's it going to go? What's that going to cost? All this stuff is crazy expensive. So that they're going to go to the Public Utilities Commission and say, we need the ratepayers of Southern California to pay for this nuclear power plant. And the consumer advocates are going to be like, no, you guys messed this thing up. You need to pay for it. So big fights over what's going to happen there. Importantly, monopoly and not monopoly, we have a term called price discrimination. And price discrimination is where we can separate out groups of consumers. When we, just to motivate this, we can go up this and make these consumer surplus triangles smaller and smaller. So if we can separate out different groups of consumers and charge them different prices for the same good, or we could have different goods and charge a similar price. One's a low quality, one's a high quality, one's a low cost, one's a high quality. Different ways, anyways. We're separating out groups of consumers. In the monopoly case, it's easier to do this. You're the single supplier. You know who your consumers are, and it's easy to differentiate products. So monopolist is they're almost always practicing price discrimination. They're trying to make smaller and smaller triangles of consumer surplus. So the marginal cost that the monopolist is using is on total production, not on the production for each group. So it's going to cost them the same to produce this good if it's the same good for different groups, but they're going to be setting things based on the demand curve for each group. So they're going to capture more and more triangles of consumer surplus. So they're going to have different demand curves for different subgroups that will have different marginal revenue curves. And importantly, what they want to do is keep these consumers apart, keep them from trading, keep them from selling to each other. So what we would say was we have a downward sloping demand curve, and we'll start with the monopolist case because it's cleaner. And we have some marginal cost supply curve. So we would have a perfect competition point out here. We have the quantity in perfect competition and the price in perfect competition. But then the monopolist can find a way to separate out subgroups. And he's going to say, I have some high-value customers. I'm going to give them badges and premium rewards cards. When they walk into the casino, they will be met by somebody at the special door. When they get to the airline, there will be a different line for them with no one in it. If you would like to sign up for Hulu Platinum, we'll show you the show before everyone else gets to see it. Right? So we're all familiar with these pitches to separate out who are these high-value people that are on the higher part of a demand curve. Right? We'll charge you this premium price so that we can carve away some of your consumer surplus. Maybe we'll have a gold level, and then we'll have a silver level, and then we'll have a bronze level. Sorry, I'm using my sarcastic voice here, but I'm trying to jog you guys into thinking that you're familiar with this already, right? You see price discrimination happens all around us. They're selling things that are basically the same, and for them, it's not costing them any different to supply things in a different way. So they're carving up the consumer surplus, which is only these little bits that are left, by carving up the market into like, here's my premium customers, and here's my standard, and here's my budget, And so there would be different, the budget price. Sometimes we had this with coupons. We'd be like, it's half off if you buy your ticket a month ahead and bring this coupon and remember to scan it at the check-in, right? So the price is up here, but if you're the budget consumer person, you could buy it ahead and scan the coupon or do something, just mail in for the rebate, right? So the budget person can get the lower price, but everybody else is going to stick at this higher price. So price discrimination, we're dividing up this consumer surplus because we're a smart seller that's controlling this. This happens in all sorts of cases, but it's easiest to think about it in the monopolist where there's one person supplying the market and they can divide things up just themselves. And losses are incurred by society in general to the extent that the overall quantity will not be the perfect competition quantity. So if we had perfect price discrimination, just to think about it in the limit case, every consumer would be charged exactly their willingness to pay, right? Every consumer, every individual consumer charged exactly their willingness to pay. The age that we live in, the age that you live in, is this question of companies with big data. Your whole life has been recorded on the internet. They have like a complex profile of you. So eventually, they'll be able to make a complex demand curve and know different prices to charge to you than somebody else. Yeah?
You said auctions are one of the ways that bank looks at price discrimination.
Definitely. Auctions can go either way. Auctions are really interesting to economists because it can happen that you also get out to auctions, if they're structured right, can get to efficient prices as well. It gets people all the way up to their reserve price if it's one scarce thing. If it's the Monet or the Van Gogh painting that's being auctioned by Christie's, they're going to drive consumer surplus out. But if it's something that's supplied more generally or there's multiple sellers, auctions, if you structure them the right way, are a way to get you much closer to this point. So auctions per se can be a pro-consumer thing in other cases. But auctions over a scarce good are all about, we're not going to set the price of Van Gogh and if it's worth somebody to somebody else. We're going to take that Van Gogh in front of the whole world. We're going to have everyone call in so we can just suck up that consumer surplus, get the maximum amount to sell it. So one thing to think about is college tuition, right? Is sort of an exercise in price discrimination, if you think about it. Certainly for private colleges, right? So if you go to private college, this is like $50,000 a year, but there's a whole bunch of rebates offered to people that can't afford it. So they set a high price and a whole range of rebates. Like there's a sticker price to go to a private college, and then somebody could get a 10K package, somebody could get a 20K package, somebody could get a free ride, right? So the college is taking your financial aid info, identify who's high willingness to pay, who's low willingness to pay, and they're going to take the consumer surplus out of the people paying for private college. It's exclusive to get into a college. You're really psyched that you got into that exclusive college. It was difficult. You had to apply to many places. So, and once you're in, you're just not going to shift around. You're not going to be able to shop for this rebate very well. So it's very difficult to resell between colleges, right? You got into a 4-year private college, you're going to stay there. You're not going to shop around and be like, who could offer me this exclusive education for $5,000 less? You're chunkily stuck there. So colleges have ways to identify whose willingness to pay is higher or lower. And the colleges have a downward sloping supply curve, right? The colleges are facing a downward sloping supply curve. They can pick where they want to be. They're picking admissions. They're scaling their size. Some parts of them being exclusive is having a smaller size. Maybe they're going to maximize and build up their classes, have slightly larger size, but they're facing downward sloping supply. Hopefully, this isn't the way with the University of California, but times are changing, tuition's increasing, University of California is competing in this marketplace. So then we can move on to oligopoly. Now this is, I'm going to talk through it. Some of the math models are more complicated. And oligopoly is difficult because it applies to many different cases. Oligopoly is a few big firms controlling. So a monopoly that's shared amongst a few giant firms. There's a few big sellers into the market. And then there are some barriers to entry. Those big firms control the majority of market share. In different cases, they're selling the same product. And in some cases, they're selling different products. Different oligopolies have different characteristics. This is where you can't just draw one definition. And then we talked about information. It's definitely based on imperfect information. The different oligopolists are going to work together to set prices and quantities. So they're going to try and keep information away from the public, and then they're sort of going to hold their cards tight while they negotiate with the other oligopoly on what the price or quantity should be. So oligopoly is some sort of place between perfect competition and monopoly, where there's not one single firm, but where a set of firms is dividing up demand. Each one of these firms, though, is big enough, we would say, to affect market price, is seeing some part of downward sloping demand. Certainly in the big industrial sectors like cars or cell phones, whatever it is that we're consuming, we see tons of competition. We see tons of advertising. We see them spying on each other and suing each other. Samsung sues Apple because they copied this thing on how to do certain patent aspects of the iPhone. We have them trying to get at their cost of technology to produce things. Who has the latest hybrid motor drive? Who has the latest pixels on their screen? So we have competition between these big firms, but then the big firms are facing some downward sloping demand. So there's a bunch of different cases where this would apply, and there's a bunch of different conditions that cause an oligopoly crisis to happen. What we talk about, though, is these firms have interdependence. What one person does on price and quantities affects what the other person does on price and quantities. So they're trying to set price for their good, and they know that it's going to affect not only their market share, but it's going to affect somebody else's market share. So it's like a game of chess where, like, should I set my price down, or will you set your price down? We see this sometimes for airplane tickets. Airplane tickets to LA or Seattle have gone down. The other company responds overnight to match those fares. So they're like, they've divided up certain routes between these big companies that have 80% of the share, and they have to move their prices around facing each other. The car makers, it's sort of incredible sometimes how much cars are matched in different classes. Like Honda and Toyota will have exactly the same looking car at exactly the same class type, and then they have their luxury brand with exactly the same looking car at each class type. And Honda and Toyota are like matching each other, right? And then the luxury car, maybe like BMW, Mercedes, they're like matching each other with their models and their price points and what their features are, whether the hybrid's available in this level or in that level. So when companies decide what products to offer at what prices, it's completely related to what the other person who shares a huge chunk of their market share is offering. So we have a whole bunch of things to think about. There's ways to calculate this. You can do a spreadsheet of sales and concentration. You can come up with a concentration index. And these things are really simple. They're like, percent of market by top 5 sellers, right? And you can think about it. If you had a spreadsheet, you could be like sales, aggregate them for like the top 5 companies. It's not that hard to think about how to calculate this, but this stuff is used in these lawsuits. And the federal government, the European regulators will go after these companies. Microsoft, Google getting sued by the Europeans for having 90% of search, 80% of search. In America, we just had the Oscars, so we have like 4 or 5 movie studios that produce 80% of movies. Interestingly, like the good movies come from the other 20% of the studios. But then eventually they'll just get bought by that big studio. Like if you have a small successful studio, it's just a matter of time until they pull you in to Mother, Disney, Universal, whatever they're called. Media, we have like 5 or 6 sources of TV news, 4 or 5. They're startups, but in terms of the bulk of what news is getting out there, it's only going through a few channels. Cell phone plans, we all know this. There's just a few places where you can get cell phone plans. An interesting side note on this is, so T-Mobile, a couple years ago, was going to get bought by AT&T. They're always like, iterating around this. They have to apply to the government to ask, can we buy T-Mobile, because what's the antitrust? This is antitrust here. You've probably heard of that. There's an antitrust division who runs these numbers. They did this for T-Mobile and AT&T. They said, no, you're not going to buy T-Mobile. You'll be too big. You and Verizon will control 90% of the market, so we're not going to let it happen. And this year, T-Mobile has done all these things like no more 2-year contract. Like T-Mobile keeps offering more and more consumer-breaking things. AT&T and Verizon, if you go, they're like constantly matching each other's plans, right? And then you go to T-Mobile and like it's different. It's disruptive. And to the extent that they're chipping away at this 80% by saying, you don't need to sign a 2-year contract. So from the consumer side, it was probably a really good thing that they didn't allow this to happen. Because pro-consumer things are happening because of it. Miller and Budweiser control 80% of the beer industry. And they control, smaller, Sam Adams, or, they constantly buy smaller brands and incorporate them into them. They're constantly getting bigger. The United States used to have breweries in every city that were local family businesses. Over time, all of those have been consolidated. They're all closed. You can buy these little off-brands, but a lot of times they're just brewed in the same Budweiser factory. Airplanes, this is a global thing. There's only 2 companies that supply airplanes, big jet airplanes, right? And this is the US versus Europe. It's often Airbus has a whole bunch of subsidies from the European Union. Boeing has a whole bunch of subsidies, indirect or not, from our government, so it becomes nationalist sometimes, who's buying which planes. But they've divided the world market up into these. This is the most expensive thing you could probably buy. It's hundreds of millions of dollars, these contracts, and they've divided the world market up. And it goes way into the future. People are buying planes 20 years from now at hundreds of millions of dollars. It's a crazy big industry. So another important part that's not exactly oligopoly, but it's control of output of something is a cartel. A cartel is a group that acts together to restrict the supply. So this often happens in natural resources. So we'll have companies that, a few mining companies control the supply of different precious metals. There's a couple of big copper companies, a couple of big silver producers. There's a whole bunch of other minerals that are produced in 1 or 2 areas in the world. So amongst the members of a cartel, like the members of the oligopoly, you need to decide who's going to sell into what market share. And you have to monitor that both people are part of the deal. So say there's like 2 companies that produce some precious mineral. They're going to divide up the world market. And they're going to say, you're going to sell this much, I'm going to sell this much. And then there's often an incentive for one to cheat on the other. They've set this nice high price. They have a low cost to extract it. They're like, oh, well, we're selling so much. They'll never notice if I load up another ship with it. And then it falls apart and it gets back together again. Cartels come and go because there's cheating, and then they go back to the drawing board and divide up the world again. In agriculture, we do this on purpose, interestingly. We allow producers of certain crops to get together. In agriculture, the price is often driven very low to the cost of production or lower. So we have crazy things. We have like the prune board, the raisin board. We have the almond board. And some of them seem crazy, like there's a board for dried prunes that's like working on the supply of prunes. That's crazy. But almonds are billions of dollars in California. And they're coordinating the market share and making sure that it's stable. The price of almonds goes down, a warehouse fills up with almonds. They're going to wait for like a future where the price stabilizes. The raisin board, they're like, you're not going to cheat and sell raisins if you're not a member of our raisin group. A big one that we do is milk. This is huge money. You have to have the right to sell milk, both in California and then in other states. You have a production quota for milk. There's a fixed amount of fluid milk that's sold. And if you want to sell milk in California, you have to buy the right to sell milk. How do they enforce that? They monitor it. They go, there's a few big dairies. There's choke points. There's big dairies that handle it. You're not selling milk directly to consumers. You're selling milk to the big packaging places that are then selling it to the supermarkets. So there's ways to monitor who's selling what. They are legal. So in agriculture, this is often under government mandate. So the milk quota is part of the government that runs it. For these ones like the raisin board or the almond board, the government gives a mandate that these agricultural producers can get together and they sort of monitor it and oversee it. For some of the big things like milk, or we have these government price supports for grains, the government just intervenes directly in the market.
So with that milk quota, does that mean like small local farmers sort of like quota that's designed for corporate setting, so they can sell their product and just
That can happen. So there are ways that small producers can sell small amounts, and they can get in with like a smaller artisanal dairy or something. But there isn't a lot of there's much less direct-to-consumer milk than you would think. Like even organic milk is going through the one big Clover that's buying for all the organic producers on the North Coast. So they are affording. Sometimes artisanal niche products actually are like buying organic certification is expensive. So like then you're buying membership in the club of organic foods. Anyways, so we have some cartels where we do it on purpose, definitely in agriculture. And we have other cartels. Well, one of the most famous cartels of all time, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries controlling the price of oil. This is historical before your time, but there was 2 huge price spikes that rocked the world economy in 1973 and like 1979. And they just turned off the production and supply of oil and drove the oil price way up. But if you look at the history of OPEC, they got together, they decided to restrict supply, they saw the price go way up, they were psyched, they were getting big payments, and then they started cheating. Saudi Arabia is pumping more than it's supposed to.